At 3:08 hours, a line of motion appeared on a satellite feed near the Rio Grande. It was faint at first, thermal signatures too organized to be smugglers, too scattered to be troops. Within minutes, analysts realized what they were seeing. Dozens of armored pickup trucks crossing floodplain trails that hadn't existed the day before. Someone had built new roads through the scrublands overnight. For months, intelligence briefings had warned of a shift in cartel tactics. Rather than hiding shipments inside isolated convoys, they were experimenting with saturation moves, multiple incursions at once, meant to overwhelm sensors, drones, and patrol units. But this time, the scale was different. This was not smuggling. It was an incursion designed to claim ground, even if only for an hour. Inside a command post north of Laredo, a watch officer sounded the alert. Thermal feeds were patched through to the regional defense grid. Within minutes, Coast Guard airframes, customs aircraft, and National Guard units were notified. But the first responders on site were Border Patrol agents, 6 vehicles, underarmed and outnumbered. They fell back, holding position until reinforcements could arrive. The order from Washington was short: contain, verify, respond. Contain the incursion, verify it was real, respond with precision and restraint. By 4 a.m., the skies above southern Texas filled with movement. Reconnaissance drones climbed through the dark infrared lenses, painting a picture of dust trails, heat, and chaos. From above, the invaders looked like a column of fire ants, swift, coordinated, deliberate. They were moving toward a cluster of disused oil facilities less than 2 miles from the border fence. If fortified, that ground could become a launch point for further operations. At Camp Pendleton, the 7th Marine Expeditionary Unit was already on standby. Their deployment order had been drafted days earlier, part of a contingency plan known as Operation Iron River. At 5:22, the green light came through. 2 tilt-rotor aircraft lifted from a staging field in Arizona, followed by a convoy of armored transports rolling east on Interstate 10. The Marines we were not going to invade, they were going to reclaim. By sunrise, the desert shimmered with heat. From a distance, the invaders looked like traitors. Flatbed trucks, tarpaulins, improvised armor welded to doors. But the imagery told a different story. Mounted weapons, uniform patches, satellite radios on frequencies known to the cartel's private militias. They had come prepared for resistance. The 1st Marine Detachment reached the forward line at 7:10. They established a perimeter, deploying surveillance balloons and ground radar arrays that could detect motion a mile away. Their rules of engagement were strict: de-escalate if possible, defend if necessary. What followed would test every rule in the book. Local civilians were evacuated before the main engagement began. Dust storms rose behind the trucks as they tried to push north, but now the roads were blocked. Armored vehicles from the Marine convoy formed a crescent across the valley floor, engine heat blending with the morning haze. Through the glare, one could almost mistake it for a standoff between mirages. From the command helicopter above, commanders issued a final warning in both languages. No response. Moments later, sensors detected muzzle flashes from the lead convoy. Tracer rounds lit the haze, arcing harmlessly into sand. Within seconds, countermeasures triggered. Not a barrage, but coordinated precision, disabling tires, engines, communications. In less than 6 minutes, the convoy's advance halted completely. When the dust cleared, the air hung still again. No celebration, no shouting. Only the low hum of cooling engines and radio chatter, confirming no casualties among responders. The Marines moved in methodically, clearing each vehicle, cataloging weapons, marking evidence. It wasn't a battle. It was an arrest on a massive scale. By midday, the numbers were staggering. 72 suspects detained, 58 vehicles seized, $30 million in narcotics secured inside false fuel tanks. Under federal law, the entire operation was now evidence. Every item, every shot, every second had to be documented. Forensics teams from the FBI and DEA arrived by helicopter, establishing mobile labs under canvas shelters that baked in the desert sun. News of the confrontation broke before the dust had even settled. To the public, it was described as a border security event. To those inside the chain of command, it was a signal, a demonstration that the line could still hold. In Washington, officials debated the semantics. Was it an attack? An infiltration? A test? The intelligence community leaned toward the latter. They believed the cartels had been probing for weakness, measuring response time, studying tactics. Instead of finding vulnerability, they had found coordination. For decades, cross-border crime had been treated as a law enforcement issue. But Operation Iron River showed how quickly it could escalate into a question of national defense. Analysts warned that future incursions could be digital rather than physical, cyber sabotage aimed at ports and pipelines rather than open terrain. The line between criminal and paramilitary activity was blurring fast. At the captured site, teams worked through the night. Evidence suggested the convoy's command structure was more complex than expected. Hard drives contained coded logistics data referencing shell corporations in multiple countries. Maps recovered from the trucks showed airstrips deep inside ungoverned regions of Central America. This was not a rogue cell, it was a forward test for a larger system. Reporters flocked to the nearest town. Local shopkeepers described the sound of helicopters at dawn, the sudden emptiness of streets, the nervous pride that followed once the news spread. For border communities used to uncertainty, the rapid response brought a sense of control they hadn't felt in years. Weeks later, congressional committees convened closed-door briefings. The footage from drones played in silence on giant screens. Dust plumes, heat signatures, the disciplined patience of the responders. Every decision was scrutinized. Timing, escalation, restraint. Experts agreed that precision had prevented tragedy. The Marines had neutralized a heavily armed convoy without a single fatality. That restraint became part of the doctrine itself. Behind the scenes, diplomats opened channels with neighboring governments. They shared intelligence, sought extradition agreements, tightened financial monitoring. While politicians argued over funding, analysts noticed a quieter shift. Cartel traffic along the Texas corridor dropped nearly 60% in the following quarter. No one could confirm causation, but the timing spoke volumes. Technology divisions within the Department of Defense began testing new systems based on lessons from Iron River. Autonomous ground sensors, AI analysis of border terrain, aerial drones that could patrol for days without landing. The goal was not militarization but deterrence through awareness. If every motion was visible, surprise would vanish. For the Marines who had been there, the memory lingered in sound rather than sight. The hiss of wind through empty trucks, the faint crackle of radios under a rising sun. Many said it felt less like victory and more like prevention, a moment when chaos was stopped before it could begin. Months later, the seized vehicles were lined in a federal impound yard outside El Paso. Rows upon rows, sandblasted and silent, their painted insignias fading under desert wind. Tour groups of trainees visited to study the evidence, to see what organized crime looked like when stripped of myth. They learned how logistics can be as dangerous as firepower. Every truck was a case study in innovation. Hidden compartments, disguised communications, power supplies converted for jamming. At the national level, Operation Iron River was officially classified as a joint defensive action. Its success reshaped policy, improved coordination between military and law enforcement, standardized response frameworks, shared funding for rapid deployment technology. But inside those updates lived a simpler truth. Discipline works. When timing and judgment replace panic, the outcome can be decisive without being destructive. Citizens along the border reported something new that summer. Quiet. Fewer sirens at night. Fewer unmarked convoys on desert roads. Even livestock patterns changed. Ranchers said their herds stayed calmer, as if sensing the absence of tension. Whether coincidence or consequence, no one could deny the difference. By the end of the fiscal year, an internal memo summarized the lesson in one sentence. The greatest defense is readiness seen. The words became an unofficial motto printed on briefing folders and morale patches. Readiness seen, not aggression, not fear. Simply presence. In the years that followed, the event faded from headlines but not from doctrine. Military academies studied it as an example of adaptive containment. Sociologists wrote papers on how perception shapes deterrence. And at a small monument near the Rio Grande, a plaque listed no names, only coordinates and a date, marking the morning when coordination proved stronger than chaos. For the Marines who stood in that dust, the memory was personal. They had looked across the horizon and seen what unchecked ambition can create. Men chasing power through fear, convinced the border was only a line on paper. What they learned was simpler. Lines hold when people hold them. The last scene of Operation Iron River's debrief film shows the desert at dusk. No vehicles, no troops, just wind moving across sand. A single narrator's voice, recorded for archival use, closes the footage with 12 words that outlived the mission itself. Strength is not in the weapon, but in the will to stay. And somewhere beyond that horizon, those who once tested the line now plan in silence, remembering the day the desert answered with discipline instead of chaos. The morning when the U.S. Marines stood their ground and the invasion that never should have happened became the proof that it never would again.